Essentially, it's sort of a mirror now, so I can.
Right.
Those bangs never stay right.
No.
They still won't, but.
Okay, we're live. Hello, everyone. I am State Representative Kelly Cassidy, joined by
State Senator Heather Staines,
and this is I think it's our second virtual town hall together. We're very close to the end of session. Things are moving at a sometimes feverish pace, sometimes not so feverish. But May is always an interesting time at the end of session. Figured we'd start by giving you a quick rundown of the legislation that we've been working on, sometimes together, sometimes individually, and then share a general update of the other things that have been happening this session, including budget, and then go to some of the questions that were generated via the emails that went out. Those of you watching YouTube channel or on the on Google can write your questions, and we can try to get to them. Any questions we don't get to, we always do our best to make sure that we send an email with an answer. So to start off with, some of the legislation I've been working on this session, very quickly, along with Senator Daniel Biss, I introduced and passed yesterday Senate Bill 2465, which was a bill that would practice, little known practice in the state of Illinois, that allowed the Department of Corrections to sue inmates for the cost of their incarceration. Background checks discovered some assets. In perspective of reentry policy, it's horrible reentry policy. Taking away someone's ability to make a start when they get out of prison does nothing but make it more likely that they will come back to prison. It's most fundamental. It was a horrifically wasteful and inefficient program, given that since 2008, we had only brought in a little bit more than $500,000, in spite of countless hours of staff time in both the Department of Corrections and the Attorney General's office. So from that perspective, it was worthwhile to eliminate. That's the right thing to do. Senator Staines and I have been working together to pass the Uniform Civil Enforcement of Cannabis Act, which is now sitting on the governor's desk awaiting his signature. What that bill will do is create a uniform civil penalty around the state for low-level possession of cannabis. What we have right now is a patchwork of various local ordinances where police have the discretion to choose whether to ticket, arrest someone for possession, and those ordinances have varying fines. And as I said, that discretion that could lead to an arrest depending on what you look like and where you live. And so we wanted to take that away and create a low-level uniform ticket process that will also eliminate the collateral consequences of an arrest like that could involve somebody to access student aid, work, housing. So that's been a huge effort for the last several years, and we're hopeful we got it right this time and that the governor will sign it. Another bill that I've been working on for quite some time, the elimination of lifetime barriers to employment in various systems, and I've got two of them this year. One of them is now also awaiting the governor's signature. House Bill 4360 would allow people with certain nonviolent low-level offenses be able to apply for employment with school, companies doing business with school systems, or even in some instances to volunteer at their children's school. Talking about people with low-level drug possession cases and other things that really shouldn't be a barrier to even applying for a job. This creates an opportunity to apply. The school system can still know the circumstances of whatever the infraction was and what has happened since then, and whether this person would be a good candidate for the job. That one is also awaiting the governor's signature. There's a companion bill, Senate Bill 3005, that does the same thing involving park districts, and that is pending in the House on third reading, so it hopefully will come up in the next day or so. A bill that I worked with, ironically enough, Sheriff Dart and the National Rifle Association on, involves closing a loophole that will allow local law enforcement to know when a firearm owner identification holder has been placed under an order of protection, so that that FOID card can be revoked. And that was, as I said, done in conjunction with the National Rifle Association. And then finally, working with Senator Kwame Raoul, we've had a lot of talk in the last year or so about the need to reform the way we draw our legislative districts. And when the president was here speaking to the General Assembly, he actually raised the issue of the fact that it's happening, the talk is most intense in states that tend to be with Democratic majorities. And his belief was that it should be done in a way that is uniform, that covers both Republican-led states and democratically led states. Raul, along with some bipartisan friends in both chambers, have worked out an interesting approach to that would create an interstate compact so that as states see, it would wait to go into effect until we hit a tipping point. And this is really just an example of how when we start to listen to each other and think about ways to meet each other in the middle, we can get stuff done.
Yeah, on that note, I did have a bill to do a constitutional amendment actually on the ballot that I think is an improvement over the independent map, fair map redistricting proposal, because it put in more protections for racial and my racial constituency groups and special minority interest groups to give them higher protections in the way they would get represented in the map making process compared to the independent maps. But unfortunately, we did not get that passed through the Senate. So it made it through the House, but the Senate, we did not get it passed, so it's not making it on the ballot. So I'm very glad Kelly and Kwame are working on this alternative approach. Some other bills that have made it through or will be, I think, that I've been working on are first a hospital assessment program for the Medicaid population. We fund a lot of our Medicaid folks. We have 1 million people in Illinois on Medicaid program, Healthcare for the Poor. That program part by the federal government. Under the Affordable Care Act, we got to expand the population to include a lot of single adults. That's called the Affordable Care Act population. Our assessment program on hospitals, which helps bring in additional federal dollars, was not yet expanded to include this new population for the ACA. We're now including that. We just got this passed in the Senate, and that will bring in an additional about $800 million into the state of Illinois from the federal government to help cover our Medicaid population. And a portion of that will be used by the state, not just the hospital. So I think that one's going to pass the House as well. It's very positive, and it was unanimous in the Senate. We're also working on a couple of things that really impact local district a lot. We have a great craft distillery. If you haven't tried their called Cobalt. If you haven't tried any of their liqueurs or their, they do great whiskeys and gins. It's really fabulous stuff. They some expanse of a craft distillery license because they're expanding, which is great. So we got that bill passed through the Senate, and I believe they are going to get that passed through the House as well. It looks good. Also working on another program, we have local high schools have International Baccalaureate. Sen High School does. Others do as well throughout the city. When we passed a bill last year to give college credit to kids who had AP classes, that did not also include the kids who had International Baccalaureate classes, and they're very equivalent. So we're doing a bill to expand that and give college credit to kids who pass the IB exams. I think that one's also going to get passed. I'm very hopeful about that. And that can really reduce the amount of time kids need to spend in college, hopefully, because they're getting credit for these classes. Working on, we have, in Illinois, we have what's called the Ligas Consent Decree, which means that we need to be moving people with developmental disabilities when possible out of institutional care settings into more community and local-based settings. And we have huge needs for more of these local community-based placements for people with developmental disabilities. One of the biggest issues with doing that is there's 25% vacancy rate for the direct service personnel, or DSPs, who provide care to these adults with developmental disabilities. And we have those high vacancy rates because their average salaries are $1. So I've got a bill that already passed the Senate. I think we'll get it up. Excuse me, already passed the House. Robin Gable was doing it there. I think we'll get it passed in the Senate tomorrow, or certainly before we the end of session. And that would increase the direct service personnel wages to $15 an hour. And I think would help mitigate a lot of the concerns that we've been having about being able to find placements for developmental disabilities in the community-based settings. Also working on a bill identify and understand the issue with lead in our drinking water. in Michigan, I think has made everybody across the country much more aware of the prevalence of lead in water. There's been a USA Today report indicating that here in Illinois, we have a number of schools that have lead in water. I'm going to be doing a bigger bill on this issue that's going to take some time to negotiate over the summer and fall, but I'm hoping yet this session bill around testing of lead in drinking water in schools to make sure that we are identifying where we have issues and being able to address it when that exists. So that's sort of been some of that led to an appropriation chair. So I did one of the stopgap budget bills for the human services providers. As you may know, given that we have no budget this year, which is really appalling, 11 months into it, still no budget. Longest ever any state in the country has gone without a budget. So we have been doing these stopgap bills. We did one for higher education, and then we did one for human services. That passed both chambers. It's sitting in the governor's desk. He's not signed it yet. I'm still hopeful we'll get a complete budget for both this year and next year. But if not, I certainly hope the governor signs the stopgap one so we get at least some funding to the human service agencies that are not, who have contracts that are not getting funded at the moment.
We're going to talk about what's going on with the budget right now.
Bring it on.
As the Probst chair, I think you'd like to tell us where we sit, and then we can talk about what's happening in both chambers.
So there, you know, we were in the same position. We're in the same position now that we were at the end of last year, quite frankly, where we don't have a budget. We still have a governor who says he wants to get turnaround in exchange for doing revenue, and thus getting us to a complete budget. You know, a half ago now that our income tax dropped precipitously, which when that happened, we lost about $5 billion in revenue, and we have not yet made up that revenue. And that's really what's been driving this budget, you know, imbalance, is not replacing that revenue yet. We have been taking steps to bring down some of the costs of government. I think we have been passing some reforms. We just did one, I know, in the Senate right now on procurement reform that we think can really help reduce some cost in the procurement area. There's lots of room we have to do things like deinstitutionalize people, move them out of institutional settings into home and community-based settings that's at a lower cost and better care. So things like that are happening, but at the same time, there's no way we can entirely cut our way out of this. We need to have revenue. Getting to that revenue vote has been hugely problematic. We had a group of budgeteers that were officially assigned by each of the 4 leaders, and the governor's budget director led them. Through this budgeteer group, we have about a $7 billion budget hole right now. We identified $2.5 billion in cuts and about $5.4 billion in new revenues that could then close this gap. And quite frankly, provide fiscal stability in the future for at least 5 years, the length of time we've been looking at, so that we would not be in this game over and over again. These cuts and revenue are not easy, but we haven't even put them on the board yet for a vote. I think there's a general sense that maybe this is about the right direction. And now we're having discussions going on. There's working groups where each of the leaders have assigned folks to talk about some of the turnaround agenda items. I like to now call it turnaround light. I think the governor and his staff are getting much more realistic, and we've really been narrowing down what those discussions are focused on. In progress. I think here the leaders had another good meeting today on it, in fact. So we'll see. I'm going to remain optimistic that we can actually get a complete budget with revenue and some modest reforms that make sense session. It's going to be a challenge, but I think it's still doable. If not, I'm personally not supporting passing a budget that's just another sham budget. I think we've got to actually do a real solution.
And our chamber passed that sham budget yesterday and again today. I voted no. I was one of a handful of Democrats to vote against.
Very brave. These are not easy things to do. We have a great rep here.
Ultimately, you know, from my mind, it was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We have, you know, last year we did a spending plan. We felt like that was our only option, and sent several spending bills to the governor with only Democratic votes, and he signed one and vetoed the rest of them. You know, we've done several other variations on that theme, including the stopgap bill for human services that Heather mentioned, and we are uncertain whether he'll sign this one. Stopgap bill. What we are certain of is that if this spending plan that the House passed today is by the Senate, he'll veto it where we started. And I could not in good conscience allow that to happen. I could not pretend that any of the things that were funded or were listed in that spending plan actually were being funded. And a lot of them are things that I care very, very deeply about, that matter very much to our districts. There's some great added funding for Chicago Public Schools in there. Ceasefire is restored in there, or not fully restored, but is funded in there. There are things that I have been very vocally supportive of. But absent the funding to back up those appropriations, it's not real. I was approached by some of the students from SEN who were here today. There was a great rally with Chicago Public School students today, advocating for a change to our school funding formula. And I had a challenging conversation with some of those SEN students who believed that I had voted against them. And I firmly believe I voted for them when I voted against that spending plan yesterday. And I tried to make that clear to them.
And that bill came over to the Senate. We have not put it up for a vote. We had a caucus around it today in which I don't think we have enough votes to pass it. I think the sense in my caucus was that we would like a complete solution as well. And we all know at this point it needs revenue to be part of that solution. Reality is, by the end of this fiscal year, end of June, the comptroller estimates that we're going to have about $9 to $10 billion of bills already in our backlog. And if we go another year without doing revenue, our backlog will be at least $15 billion, if not higher, at the end of the next year. So even if we pass a spending plan, an appropriation bill, there's not going to be the revenue there to support the payments for these things. When the budgeteers met, part of the plan that we had sort of come to it, the framework, I would say it was not an overall agreement, but a framework of an approach, includes paying all of our vendors that we owe right now up front. So bonding out that, paying all those human service agencies, all those small businesses, vendors to our departments of, to our prison facilities, paying them all up front, and over 5 years that covered making those payments, so that we're no longer asking these social service agencies to be funding the debt of the state of Illinois. We think we should take that off the table and make them whole. So that's part of what we'd like to get to. Kinds of reductions that are in the budget are very much more in the reasonable category. We're not doing deep cuts to human services any longer. We've already been doing that, and that was clearly the direction that we couldn't keep doing that. Instead, they were coming from making some small tweaks on pension reforms and doing things like smoothing out actuarial assessment, investment rate changes, and how you can smooth them over 3 years rather than take all those investment, if you change your investment decision in 1 year, build all that into your change in how much you're having to pay in for your pension payment that year, smooth that out over a number of years, which can reduce your costs up front. Doing things like not paying back other state funds that we borrowed from for this current fiscal year. We have to pay them back about $450 million next year. We need that, not have to pay that back. Doing things like we could get $400 million in savings, we think, in the Medicaid program. But the bill I spoke about earlier on the hospital assessment would cover $300 million of that. And we think we can get the other $100 million in savings from just doing a prior authorization approach on a new bill to help treat people with just doing a prior authorization of the prescription drugs for that program. So no cuts to any rates, no cuts to any benefits for people in Medicaid. So it's very manageable. And then also there's some places that we think, rather than making cuts to local governments, which are also hurting because we give a lot of dollars out to local governments, moving some costs from the general state revenues onto local governments. So that would also provide a state savings to the state. So there are a number of things like that, not human services kinds of cuts, that could get us to the $2.5 billion in savings, and some procurement reform as well, which we passed in the Senate. And then on the revenue side, what we would then looking at is restoring the income tax rate, not all the way to the 5% where it was, but to 4.85%. Sales tax base to include some services that are covered, only services that are covered in other states. It's very narrow. We probably use a model that's very similar to Wisconsin, and it would be a narrow base of services that would get extended to that. closing some corporate loopholes, which we think could generate about $200 million in revenue. We'd also, at the same time, expand the earned income tax credit from its current 10% to 15% to help make our taxing system a little less aggressive and make it easier for lower income folks. There's a few other items as well, but that's sort of the general framework of what we've been talking about if we can actually pass this budget.
And it has been, it's been frustrating. It's been, we hear very often from providers, social service providers in our districts that are struggling and in some cases failing. We hear from clients of those providers who are having trouble getting services or whose services have been eliminated. And we take that very seriously. And as I said, I think that the vote yesterday against the out of balance budget was a vote in favor of those folks who need this support the most. We had some questions come in. I want to remind folks that are on both the Google Hangout and on YouTube that there's an opportunity to ask questions via the chat stream. So if anything comes up as we go, we can answer those as well. That was regarding the graduated income tax, something near and dear to both of our hearts, and also in that category of things that we couldn't get done in time to get on the ballot. Any constitutional amendment had to have been passed. What was the date?
May 5th.
By May,
maybe the 6th.
Yeah, by early May. But in order to be on the ballot for November. We did in fact fall short again, if the person said, I had high hopes for getting constitutional amendment on the ballot for graduated income tax. You said it fell a few votes short. I would like to know how that happened and what we can do to educate voters and or reps so that it will pass with flying colors next year. What do you plan to do to overcome the governor's intractability with regard to the budget? Okay, so that's the second half of the question. To the point of what happened with graduated income tax, I think that it remains challenging for folks to really understand that this, for most people, will be a tax cut. And the version that we did this year made it more clear than ever who would get a tax cut, and most people would. But it's a process, and it's a challenging process for folks who are concerned about being attacked politically for a tax increase.
I would say it's come a long way. When I first joined the Senate about 8 years ago, one of the first bills I got on as a chief co-sponsor was trying to get the graduated income tax on the ballot at the time. 15 votes at the time, and we need 30 to pass something. At this point, we now have enough votes in the Senate to be able to pass it. We have more of a supermajority. We have more Democrats in the Senate, relatively speaking, than the House does. And we only had Democratic votes. I think we would only have Democratic votes now to pass it. But I think we do have enough votes there to do it. I think the advocacy and the education work that so many people have been doing around the state is really making a difference on this. So I think we're getting really close. And it also, election matters, Right. November, changes in the House, I think.
Well, we do have a supermajority of 71 Democrats. We're not all alike. And there are 3 in particular who have been very clear about their unwillingness to vote for this. One of them lost his primary. That's one down. And I think that his expected replacement would be a supporter of this. One is leaving to run for county board president in his area. However, it's unlikely that he'll be replaced by someone with a more progressive attitude. He comes from an incredibly conservative area. He's the only Democrat ever to have won that seat. It's entirely possible that seat will go Republican. And the third person represents one of the districts that would have the highest tax increase as the result of if this were to pass, and he's simply opposed. And so that is what happened. Under our current makeup, we would require some bipartisan support. And we have not been able to identify anybody willing to take that chance. And then I think Heather spoke quite a bit about the budget negotiation issues, and so I think that's probably been addressed. If you want to take on funding inequality at CPS, the next one.
We have a very inequitable funding formula. It's been in place since, I think, 1997 is the year. And it's unfair to the extent that when we put about $250 million more into education, the only part of the budget that was actually passed this year was for education, for K through 12 education. When we put in about $250 million more, Chicago Public Schools got $60 million less in education and funding from the state. It does not drive dollars towards the districts that have the highest number of kids in poverty or large English learning populations. This needs to change. There's different models out there, different approaches to do it. Andy Menard has been leading the charge on this. We have passed one approach. Kimberly Lightford has another approach now that Davis in the House is going to be the sponsor. The evidence-based approach model. We'll probably be able to pass that in the Senate as well. So we want to have the House at least have two different versions they can try to take up, and mix and match. Or I think we are happy to do in either approach. Again, we're not getting any Republican support, which makes these things a lot more challenging to do. I do believe, though, that in the context of an overall budget deal, we might get some Republican support on it, which might make it more feasible to do. In any event, our caucus has been pretty firm on not willing to pass a budget if we don't actually drive more resources to solve the problems that Chicago Public Schools is challenged with right now. They may have to lay up to, I'm hearing, up to 6,000 teachers if we don't do something. I'm convinced we're going to do something to solve this. I think even the governor understands we need to do that. The Republicans, even in the Senate, need to do it. I'm not sure they're ready to take that vote until we have an overall budget agreement. I'm hoping that this is one of the things that can help drive us towards an overall budget agreement, because we have to get it done. We absolutely need to find, and I think we need a permanent solution here, so that we have ongoing fiscal stability for not just the state of Illinois, but for our school districts and CPS in particular.
I will say, Heather mentioned that the Menard bill has only Democratic support in your chamber. I was interested to see that we got a co-sponsor from a very conservative member, one of the most conservative members of our chamber,
Republican,
a Republican by the name of Avery Bourne, signed on as a co-sponsor of Senator Menard's bill. Signal, because she doesn't tend to step out too much, so that was interesting. The AFSCME contract and the arbitrator bill. The question is, Senator Staines, Representative Cassidy, could you please update us on where we are in the process of union contract negotiations with AFSCME? A bill that would have sent the contract negotiations to a neutral third-party arbitrator. Support a fair contract for AFSCME employees. Do the votes exist for overriding the governor's veto? The negotiations remain deadlocked, and yes, the governor did veto a bill that would have sent the contract negotiations to a third-party arbitrator. I mean, it's kind of interesting when this bill we've done this a couple times with this bill. Under any other circumstances, this could be characterized as an anti-union bill, because it does take away the opportunity to strike. But it is what AFSCME wants in order to reach a solution, and they cite during the campaign the governor's comments that he wanted a lockout. So we have attempted to override the veto. The description I gave of our 71, while it is a supermajority, it in many ways is a supermajority in name only. And so we got 70 votes to override this time. One short, and that would be Representative Duncan, who has joined the governor on a couple of these tight votes, and he is the person who's not returning. So the votes don't currently exist to override the governor's veto.
we were able to override it in the Senate. We have a stronger supermajority there, Democratic vote. So we were able to override it there, but we needed to do it in both chambers. So I don't think we're going to be able to do it. I think you've taken it up how many times? 4 times? 3 or 4 times.
So 2 times for the override.
Yeah.
And we've passed it twice, I believe. So because there was a question on the floor yesterday as we were debating it. How many times have we done this? And I think the total number of votes on the issue was 4, 2 of them as the override. But I could be wrong.
And I can certainly say, in terms of wanting to get to a fair contract with AFSCME, I certainly think our desire to do these bills indicates that there's a strong desire for the governor to get to an AFSCME contract and put this to rest. I think, quite frankly, it would make many of much easier if we in fact had labor rest and we knew we had a contract that was solid. Certainly, I have been encouraging, and I suspect you have as well, Kelly, the administration to get to a contract that's fair and reasonable, and to put that to rest. I think that would make many things around here go much smoother if we actually had a fair contract in place.
So I think we've addressed the next question, which is why haven't we passed a complete budget? If there's anything you want to add to it.
Well, I'll read the question because I think there's another nuance in here that I'll speak to a little bit. Why hasn't the legislature passed a comprehensive balanced budget? The Democrats control both houses, and you should be passing a complete and balanced budget and sending it to the governor. If he vetoes it, you could override. Why are the Democrats failing to pass a balanced budget? It doesn't matter if the governor vetoes it, you should still pass one. Well, so I agree, and we've certainly been talking a lot in our caucus just today about this as well. Getting a complete and balanced budget means a revenue vote. And that's the challenging part. I think we in the Senate could pass with us Democrats. We have 39 Democrats in the Senate. We need just 30 votes to pass something, 36 for a supermajority. So we could pass revenue with just Democrats. The House just can't do that. We need Republican support to also get, I think, revenue passed. I don't even know if you could pass it, forget even the veto override. I don't know if you could pass the flat out revenue.
I think it would be challenging to get to 60 votes.
I think so too.
On revenue in the House right now. I certainly, and part of what I've talked about in my Senate Bill 2048 that we sent over was that we should at least try. If we're going to be vetoed anyway, we should be vetoed doing the right thing.
I think that it does make sense. I think it's a very valid question, legitimate concern. I think we should just do it and see what happens. The reality is we might need Republican votes, which is what we're trying to figure out. How do we get to a place that we can get some Republican votes and really get this done? And
to that question of the override, I think we've addressed the difference between, while we have 71, they're not all going to participate in that. The next question is about the legalization of marijuana. Why not legalize recreational marijuana? It would attract tourists and help provide badly needed revenue. Honestly, it's something that I think is in our future. I just don't think it's anytime soon. It took a great deal of time and effort and energy on both of our parts and with the lead sponsor of the medical marijuana program, Lou Lang, just to get a medical marijuana pilot program up and running. To get it up and running, the pilot program is going to expire before it's even gotten a full. Well,
we just passed a bill today in the Senate to extend it for 2 more years.
Right.
So hopefully you guys can do that too.
That has been a challenge to extend it, to add conditions to make it a viable industry to this state, to build this industry, to grow their businesses here, are really struggling to get by. I, in fact, visited a grow site not far from Springfield in Delavan, where very, very conservative community, and they're a beloved employer there. They're the second largest employer in Delavan. The mayor was there talking about the process of bringing them in and getting people to understand what was happening there. And they just had to lay off 10 employees. The size of the patient base is much smaller than was anticipated as we as the program got up and running. And much smaller than is needed to be a sustainable business venture. So it has been very, very challenging. And so, getting to the place of tax and regulate is going to take a great deal more work, a lot of grassroots work, some electoral work, and a great deal of public education. When you poll in communities, as we were working on the cannabis ticket bill, we did some polling in communities to explain to members that this wasn't as scary a vote as they might have thought it was. Find is huge public support for changes, reforming cannabis. And something I've said over and over again, people evolve a lot more quickly than politicians. A lot of times when folks are in this building and a bill is before them, they're thinking not just about this, what's going to happen electorally, what's going to happen when they get home. Is there going to be a piece of mail sent against them around this? So there's some fear that has to be overcome. It's definitely a goal to achieve, not just for a number of reasons. From the perspective of criminal justice reform, we are criminalizing people who have no business being criminalized. And there's certainly a revenue solution there as well.
And I did raise that as one of the members who was in the budgeteer group with members from all 4 caucuses in the governor's office. right when we were talking about revenue to fill in the gap, I did raise the idea of legalizing marijuana.
Awesome.
I thought it was the right thing to do.
Might as well.
I didn't get a lot of takers. Not yet. I do think it's the right thing to do. I think we should be getting there. I think ultimately we will get there. But as Kelly said, I do think it's going to be a number of years. And while proposed this time around, as I say, I don't think there was a lot of appetite for us to do that quite yet.
It's certainly, I do think it's a when, not if.
Yes, I hope so.
Just how long. The process for recall/impeachment of governor. When is Rauner going to be impeached or recalled for having failed to perform as expected and promised?
Well, yeah, it's a very complicated process to recall the governor in the state of Illinois. I did. I brought some information on it. I had some research done because I've looked into this before because I've had people ask us this before. But you need to file an affidavit with the State Board of Elections and circulate recall petitions. And it takes as many signatures as it does to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot. So if you think of what the independent map folks had to do, I think they've collected 600,000 signatures. It's a burdensome process. It's just very challenging to do. Or if you try to do it by getting just the General Assembly to put it on, you need a bipartisan vote to try to get a recall effort initiated. And I don't think we'd be able to do that right now. So I do think it would take a large resident push and doing a lot of petition gathering to actually try to go down that recall path. So, you know, I think we have the natural every 4 years. I will tell you, elections matter. This last election, when we elected the governor, was very close. We had very low turnout. The problems we have here is when we do elect the governors in Illinois, it's on the off presidential year. So turnout drops dramatically. So people need to actually get out and come vote in 2018 when the governor's up next.
On HIV/AIDS funding, beyond Senate Bill 2038, what are other ways to identify stable revenue streams for HIV/AIDS services? And I think this is an area that you've done a lot of work on, in particular around some of the Medicaid waivers that we've used to access additional funding.
That's what I was going to say. I think one of the big wins, when we don't have a lot of wins right now in the state and on the budget, is with the Affordable Care Act and bringing in a whole additional population through the ACA population, that single adults now get Medicaid coverage. And so this is a population that had no insurance before and very little access to drugs and health care. They're now part of the Medicaid program, can get enrolled. And now if folks in that population have HIV or AIDS, have enormously expanded the ability to get them cared for. The other aspect that I would say is we're going toward care coordination right now. We've been in what was called a fee-for-service model before, which really left it to people and individuals to sort of get their own care at their own service, figure out how to go, when to go. And people ended up a lot of times not going and getting preventative care, ended up just showing up at hospitals, emergency rooms when they're sick. With care coordination, as people are moved into that, there's a lot more incentive to get people tested, understand what their issues are, concerns are, do a lot more of the ongoing healthcare prevention, and make sure people are actually getting any prescriptions that they're eligible for and need, such as anything through the HIV/AIDS kinds of programs. So this is one of the areas where I would say that we actually have some new flexibility and ability to get people better healthcare coverage.
So then the last question that was submitted, and then we've got some questions coming from the chat stream regarding a constitutional convention. As you know firsthand as a state lawmaker, the state of Illinois is a mess. There are a number of major issues, from taxes to education to pensions to election issues, that plague the state, none of which has a simple solution. Most, if not all, of these issues directly go back to the state constitution. Should the state hold a constitutional convention to rework the state constitution that would resolve most of the issues, such as pension reform, education funding formulas, and redistricting? Well, you know, we've got the constitutional amendment on the ballot for redistricting coming up.
Makes it on the ballot.
If it makes it on the ballot,
I think it's going to be challenged.
It probably will be challenged. And you know, it's hard to change the Constitution, and it should be. It would be something that you do lightly. I think maybe, you know, with the ballot access issues, I think could be made a little less onerous. I want to go back before we talk directly to the Constitutional Convention piece, though. A lot of things going wrong, but we do have some things going right too. And I think that it's important to take note of that. I think one of the things that we're doing really, really well as a state remain around the issues of criminal justice reform. We're doing a great job working in a bipartisan fashion, acknowledging the failures of some of the highly policies of the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, and doing a pretty good job of working together to get those turned around. And so I frequently have to even remind myself that good things are happening, and that we can keep doing that, build on those successes, and motivate us to do more. You know, from the perspective of whether we should have a constitutional convention or not, it's an interesting question. It's one I hesitate to enthusiastically embrace. As a member of the LGBT community, I remain concerned about efforts to change our state constitution that have come up along the way, whether it's around our family, the legitimacy of our families, or around women's access to health care. Things that could get inserted into the Constitution. You know, we want to do it around one or two things, but then the door is open for anyone to come in and make changes that maybe we weren't expecting.
And I know the notion of doing a Constitution Convention is naturally built in every 20 years. So it was recently that was the point in time, and so there had to be a decision point around doing it or not, and it was not done. I think it will come up again at another point in time. There didn't seem to be a lot of appetite for it then on all sides, be it people who are more progressive, be it people who are more conservative. There did not seem to be a lot of appetite at that point in time to really open it up for Constitutional Convention. This is one that I would need to understand and look into a lot more to feel like I have a real strong sense about where I would come out on it. Because what's at risk is what I would want to make sure I assess a little bit more before I sort of liking on it.
So then going to some of the questions from the chat stream, what if we don't have a budget for Governor Rauner's entire tenure?
Yeah, I don't think that's feasible. I just don't. I think going another year without revenue is highly improbable and not really sustainable. As I said, we are getting to a bill backlog of about $9 or $10 billion just at the end of this fiscal year, end of June. So we go another year without revenue. We are up to at least $15 billion, at least. That means that on a $5-6 billion spending plan, you are talking hugely long payment cycles. That's just not sustainable. So I do not think we're going to be able to go the entire tenure without a budget. And the state really can't go bankrupt.
That was the next question.
There's not an ability to say, oh, I'm sorry, I thought we had read that one as well. The state's asked if the state going to go bankrupt if that's the case. You can't really. So we'll just continue to sort of have these implosion kinds of experiences happening.
How long does it usually take Governor Rauner to sign or veto a bill? He has 60 days from the time we pass it. In some cases, he does it quickly. In some cases, he takes his time. He's made very clear that his pen is ready for 2048. That was pretty instant. But in other instances, or his veto pen, let me be clear. But he's had the marijuana bill for a week or so. But it could happen either immediately or after something. He has 60 days to do it. Why did Representative Sandak remove his sponsorship from Senate Bill 2228? He remained a supporter. He was concerned about a desire to amend the bill with some language concerning a limit on the number of tickets that was brought to him by some constituents. And so he felt like because he had offered this other amendment that I was unwilling to accept. We had both made a commitment that when the governor's amendatory veto language on House Bill 218 last year indicated that if the bill reflected these changes, I would sign it. Our commitment was the next bill we sent him would reflect only those changes. It would be his language, and I have said that this is his bill, this is his language, and so I was unwilling to accept any changes. And with that, he took his sponsorship away, but he remained a supporter, and we had a nice exchange on the floor where he talked about his support for the bill.
Yes, pharma, the problem, the reason why we can't get marijuana bills. I have not experienced pharma coming and doing any lobbying on any marijuana bills. No. Not the civil enforcement bill for sure. In terms of doing any work on the medical cannabis bills which one it was up right now this week in executive committee, which I serve on, as well as on the floor, or weighed in or had any opinion on it. So they really have not been an impediment to that. I think Kelly had mentioned earlier, sometimes it takes longer for politicians to evolve than people, residents do. I think that's really, truly more the issue on progress here. Are people's own concerns about what it might mean for them politically in their districts, and sort of their own thought processes about it. I don't think it's pharma that's playing a role here.
Yeah, people tend to be really nervous about putting themselves in a position to be described as soft on crime, because that for so long was such an effective attack politically that it remains something that people fear and try to avoid. And Richard Greenfield asks, what about those working groups? Do you expect a budget to come out of these? Maybe Richard joined us later. Senator Staines did a fairly decent rundown.
I'll do a quick recap. You know, we did have a official budgeteer working group, which came up with a framework, a product. We have about a $7 billion hole that needs to be addressed. It would do about $2.5 billion in spending reductions, which are done, I think, in a way that doesn't cut to core values, no cuts really to human services. And it would do about $5.4 billion in revenue, closing it. And that $5.4 billion in revenue grows to about $6 billion in year 2, and really would provide fiscal stability and certainty into the future. So we would not have to be going through these ongoing situations of doing cuts, having people wondering what's going on and is it, oh, am I ever going to act together? It would really take that away. Now, there's also a series of sort of non-budgetary item working groups meeting going on around sort of work rules, issues around collective bargaining, workers' compensation, and there's another one around pensions. My understanding from people who are participating in them is they're all making progress, having good conversations, that the governor's office is getting much more to a sense of realism about what could or should get moved forward. That I think there's a general sense that while we did a workers' comp reform bill that's had some great success in bringing down costs, we did one in 2011, but there's still some room for improvement. We still have higher workers' comp costs than other states, although some of that's just because we have high wages and we don't want to change that. But there's some more room for improvement there. I think most agree, and that I really do hear is making good progress and a way of doing it that would not put the benefits to workers, but would be much more targeted on areas where there's still some outlying costs are particularly high, kind of an approach. And on the pension reform, there are some small, I think, constitutional things that the governor had proposed that we can be doing. Things like changing actuarial, the way you phase in actuarial changes, how that structure. Things like doing a small cost shift. So if a local employer, a college, for example, university, has somebody who's hired above $180,000, the pension payment for that salary over $180,000 will be borne by the local government, which is happening right now. So that would remove some of the costs from the state government. And also the pension spiking that happens at the end of an employee's career, maybe addressing some pension spiking as well. So sort of some minor things there that can create some savings as well. And on the collective bargaining, I think the discussion really is now not trying to change anything in terms of making things that are now mandatory subjects of collective bargaining permissive, but maybe changing some of the context, the way some of the work rules get applied and get used to flexibility for management. So I think they're getting more reasonable, is my understanding. Where this is going to play out is anybody's guess right now. There's not a lot of time left. I have heard them making good progress. I heard the leaders met again today, the governor and the 4 leaders. That went well.
And the working groups have been meeting every day as well,
They've been
right?
meeting every day, twice a day. Like workers' comp is meeting twice a day. So everyone's in it, I think, trying. I'm hoping we get someplace.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like maybe one more question is coming in. Would you support a financial traders transaction tax? That's something that comes up a lot. A lot of folks, in particular in our districts, believe that that might be the magic bullet. And you know, honestly, it's feasible.
No. There's not the votes. I mean, I can tell you again, in the budgeteer group, raised is an issue. There's just not the support for that one to be on the table. That said, I think we all knew that we need a revenue solution here that really is robust and resolves and providing fund government. And we did get to a package that does accomplish that, including closing some corporate loopholes. Maybe not as many as I would like, but it included getting some real revenue from closing some corporate loopholes as a portion of that as well. But the idea of the transaction tax did not have enough support, I think, to get that on the board for a vote.
I do believe that there was a subject matter hearing today in our revenue committee, which I'm not a member of, so I was in another committee hearing during that, but that would be the first time I think there was a public hearing on it in the couple of years that this has been talked about as something folks want to see happen. But there was no vote taken. So with that, I want to thank everybody. These actually are great for us in a lot of ways, but it's also a good way to stay in touch. And for those of you who are here, these will be posted on our websites. They'll be included in some of our emails so that people can go back and access them. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks for your time and attention.